Hi, I'm Megan Foy with BookTrib.com. Today we're talking with both authors of Red Hotel, Gary Grossman and Ed Fuller. Red Hotel is an intense political thriller that releases on March 19th of this year. Grossman is a well-known author of thrillers and a multiple Emmy Award-winning network TV producer, while Fuller was president and managing director of Marriott International Lodging for 21 years and now serves as the president of Laguna Strategic Advisors. With Grossman's talent for political thrillers and Fuller's knowledge of the international hospitality scene, Red Hotel was born. I am glad to have them both with us today to talk about their first novel written together. Let's start. So, a thriller writer and a hotel executive. How did you two meet and decide to write what I am sure will be a bestseller?
Well, I can start that, and Ed can pick it up, and it's a wonderful story. Thank you, Megan. It started with walking my dogs one night. For me, it had started earlier for Ed. In Los Angeles, I was having a nice evening walking our two dogs, and I bumped into a neighbor and a friend, somebody I've done some television with as well. His name is Bruce Fierstein. We chatted a little bit, and Bruce said, well, wait a second, Gary, before you go, there's somebody I want to talk to you about, a man that I'm on a board with at Boston University. I'm also on a board at Boston University, but Bruce and this wonderful gentleman, Ed Fuller, were on the board, and he said, I want you to meet him. He's interested in co-writing a book, a political thriller, based on his experiences as an international hotel executive, the president of Marriott International.
Yes.
And my first reaction was, what do I have in common with a gentleman who has that wonderful experience? But what does it have to do with my experience? Bruce, I might add, who wrote 3 Pierce Brosnan James Bond films, Bruce Fierstein said, Gary, have the meeting. We did, and within 30 seconds, I realized that Ed was as much in the anti-terrorism business as the hotel business, with properties in Jakarta and Mumbai targeted by terrorists. He was getting talent and staff and guests out of Cairo with the fall of Mubarak, Tripoli when Gaddafi went down. And my first real question after those 30 seconds of introduction, who do you have on speed dial? Well, Ed told me, and I said, Ed, I think we can work together. And that's how it started for me.
Yeah, that was a good explanation. So I had done a business book while I was still working for Marriott, and the 22 years I had done the international, I had had a lot of experiences in crisis management, everything from bombings to kidnappings, and we had to really start from scratch in developing programs because Marriott was not an international company when I started that division. I had been with Marriott for 40 years domestically, but international was brand new to us starting back in 1990. And so we experienced a number of experiences, and in over 73 countries, we had hotels and had to align ourselves with different governmental issues, different crises that Gary just touched on several of them. And so I thought I could do something with it, but I was not skilled in writing a novel. And I said to Bruce, I'm stuck. I really need to find somebody who can help me write a novel. Business book, I could do. But the novel was just not my area. And the two of us hit it off.
We hit it off very quickly.
And away we go. And we've got our first one ready to go, and the second one's in the hopper.
Second one, we're 2/3 the first draft, and hope to follow Red Hotel right away with another. And it's a great collaboration because each time we get together, and today will be no exception, I learn a little bit more from this man. He just peels off another piece of his experience. The last time we met, I heard about kidnappings that he had to deal with international terrorists and cartels.
So the book's a novel, but in reality, there are real stories there, which we cannot identify real people to.
Correct.
And to make it really exciting, we've used Gary's talent to blend in the various aspects and stories into a real thriller with a really top-notch bad guy.
Oh yeah.
Cool. I do have to ask, who did he have to have on speed dial?
I wish I could tell you.
We'd have to shoot you to tell you. We don't want to.
Oh, man.
I learned that Ed's contacts in the international intelligence community run very deep. As well they should, as well we would hope that somebody who's running an international business, and particularly in the hotel business, has to have information from our State Department, has to have information from other governments in terms of threat assessments. And Ed is the man who developed the threat assessment approach in Marriott that in Red Hotel we actually cover and fictionalize, but only a little bit. And it is the standard of the industry now in terms of what Ed developed.
Nice.
So when you think about it, it's a novel, but it's got some reality to it, and it's fun. And that's really makes it been a great experience for me.
That's what's important.
And there's no quiz. You don't have to take a quiz at the end of it. You can just keep enjoying it and want the next one.
So, what was the writing process like?
I would say for me, I had sat down prior to meeting Gary and tried to literally write the book, and had failed miserably because I could not gel it together. So we've spent a lot of time at some great restaurants and sitting outside of the Montage in LA for a full day in the beautiful sunlight of California. And I would basically tell Gary stories, incidents, and then we would try to put them together into a scenario. And then Gary does his magic and kind of blends and weaves the story because he's done 5 books already, and he knows the skills that I don't have. So his example last time we were talking about, we need to distract our character in the second book.
Right.
And I said, well, you know, in Ecuador, we had this situation and and it's now part of the book. Or we had a situation with the Russians approaching our hotel in what was Soviet Georgia. And, you know, this is how we did it. And it's kind of slipped itself in there.
Ed, as you can gather, is the real deal. He knows people who knows people, which is why I'm always very nice to him. But he really does. And we sat down in the case of a Red Hotel, and Red, by the way, has to do with the designation for the top level threat assessment. It's a coded system. But we would sit and work on the outline. And then I would begin, and then I would come back and we'd retool the outline. We dig deeper into the outline. And what was critical, and it's always a marvelously fascinating thing for me while writing, and Ed sees it too, is that whatever the outline is, new characters come in. They basically just kind of knock at the door. And they appear like it's like a Twilight Zone episode. They sit down with us and say, Gary, Ed, just listen, take dictation, because I'm going to take you somewhere. And that happens because Ed has these incredible experiences. And I start working with these as clay and then begin molding. And along comes some character who makes it even more interesting or better or takes it to the next level. And it's a great collaboration. I'd never collaborated with anyone before on a novel. And I can tell you it can't possibly get any better than this.
Nice.
And we're having a deal of fun on the second one.
We are.
And Gary has walked some of our hotels in the back of the house to understand the security systems and the programs that are in place. So he's had chance to dig in and understand some of the systems.
Now I know things enough to ask questions, or not to ask questions, but make a note and ask Ed later about them.
You're making me stressed out.
So, well, there's only one thing I would warn you about, and that is there are no secrets in the hotels. Think about that the next time you travel.
Or I'll just give you a call before I go abroad.
Pages in here that you can find evidence of that, but it's absolutely stuck with me since Ed told that to me.
Oh, geez. Anyway, so Ed, you sort of answered this, but did you ever think about writing a novel before meeting Gary? So something other than Red Hotel.
Right. I had written the business book.
Yeah.
And actually, it was very successful. And some of the people that had helped me promote it are the ones that said, "Well, you ought to write a novel." And I'd look at them and go, "I wrote a business book, stood for business. I'm just not sure I've got." "Well, sit down and try it." I did it, and by chapter 3, I knew I was kidding myself. And I will not even tell you where chapter 3 is, or Gary, because I just threw it away. I just have the skill to blend, because an author really has the skill. It's an art. Now, I'm not going to talk about the art of the deal that some people may have, but I had an art that dealt with relationships and with people, which is what my business book was really about. And it kind of flows into the text of Red Hotel also.
Well, it does, because of the management. Tell Megan the title of your book, and I'll then talk about how it really works in.
The business book was You Can't Lead With Your Feet on the Desk. Wiley had published that, and it's in China, it's in Japan, it's in English and all over. So it got world distribution, which was fun. But it also had related stories similar to this. And while I worked for Marriott, I would teach in the Marriott training classes about international operations. And the professors there were the ones that pushed me to write the book.
Nice.
And what you'll find in Red Hotel is that Ed's management experience, where you can't leave with your feet on the desk, and that means you can't do it at a corporate headquarters if there's a crisis with your operation in the Middle East or in Russia or in Eastern Europe or Asia, you have to, or Mexico, South America, you have to be there. And if it means sitting down one-to-one with a cartel to negotiate somebody's safety, or getting a payment paid to people who have an Airbus that can fly in a moment of crisis and get hundreds of people out, that you have to be there to do that.
Yeah.
And for the second book,
I am a little. I'm jumping ahead.
Don't give anything away. So Gary, as a seasoned thriller writer, what is your favorite aspect of this particular book? And do you see any overlap between this novel and your executive series of books?
Wow, good question. There is overlap because the nature of telling, and I describe them as political reality thrillers. They're not just political thrillers, but they're political reality, because what we write about and what I write about in the executive series seems to be on the edge of the news, a little bit ahead of the news, or reflective of real life. And more often than not, we have to fictionalize things a little bit more, because real life begins to catch up with some of the things we talk about. In Red Hotel, we're dealing with Russia's strong interest in moving back into its former Eastern Bloc countries that it had under its domain during the Soviet era. Well, that's real. And the threats against countries like the Ukraine, as we know, down the south and up to the north, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, they're very, very real. So there's overlap in terms of creating a story and working out a story that has a political landscape based in reality. The characters are different, because in the executive books, the protagonist is a Secret Service agent who works directly with the president. In the case of Red Hotel and the Red Hotel sequel, here's a man Dan Riley, who internationally, but has relationships with the intelligence community. Now, that's good for solving problems, but what kind of problems does it also create having somebody who may have a foot in both business and the intellectual community, the intelligence world side? So that's different than the executive books. And that's all original. And it's, again, what Ed lets a little bit more out each time we talk.
Excellent. So Red Hotel spans over multiple countries across the globe and jumps back and forth in time. How did you both structure and maintain control over this complex plot?
Well, I don't think that was that hard because what Gary just alluded to, which is the Russian situation, I swear we finished Red Hotel about 6 months ago.
Yes.
And Mr. Putin has helped the story along because what he's doing seems to have been predicted. The reader won't know we predicted some of it in Russia's policies and activities. So even though the character is not Mr. Putin, the storyline has been aided by the current activities that are going on around us. So when you talk about jumping from one country to another, be brutally honest, that's what I did for a living. I mean, I'd go around the world at least 7 times a year, and one day I'm working in the Middle East, the next day I'm working in Europe, and then you're back to the Middle East or off to Asia, depending where the challenges and the opportunities were. And when you had a crisis pop up, you could be almost anywhere. I was sitting in Israel one day when we were trying to get one of our employees out of Hamas's hands in Damascus. And actually, he was released while I'm sitting in Israel, and I'm going, holy smokes, I'm only a few miles away, but we were working in a completely different environment. So you just never know when you're going to face a crisis or when an opportunity will come up or when a good business deal will come up. You just have to get on that plane and go. So I would say that the story does the same thing. If you think about it, we are all over the place.
We're all over the place because it's an interconnected world, too.
Yeah.
There's the old thing about a butterfly flapping its wings in China, and what's the effect here? In truth, butterfly flapping its wings is not going to have much effect. But somebody who makes a critical decision about business or begins conspiring and needs to have other things happen in other parts of the world, it's really global. And what I found, and maybe even more so in Red Hotel, working within on Red Hotel, is that when you start thinking about the unthinkable, you hit maybe what's just unknowable at this point, but it's out there. And you start really deep diving into that. And as Ed said, wow, 6 months, 5 months later, it's in the front page of the newspaper because it was all possible. And that's the great fun of writing political thrillers. We're not inventing situations, we're inventing scenarios that, in fact, the government needs to think about. After 9/11, and Bruce Springsteen was one of these people, Washington, the Pentagon, called on screenwriters who write action movies and spy movies and television producers to come to sit with the intelligence community and the military command to say, what are we not thinking about that you guys are thinking about and putting in your movies? Well, if that doesn't make your head spin, and maybe even, well, that's a good idea.
That's terrifying.
Read Red Hotel.
I don't think I'm going to now. I already did start it, but...
And I will do a test on it.
Oh, man, you guys are stressing me out. But anyway. So, Ed, how many of the scenes in this novel are directly from your experience as a hotel executive? You already kind of covered this. You guys are jumping ahead.
Involved in the combination in the second book right now. But I will tell you that the novel starts with a bombing, which in reality was a bombing not in Tokyo. And so we drew from that experience. A evacuation from a hurricane was drawn from an actual experience. So there are a number, and frankly, I sent a note to some friends over the holidays, and I said, the book's coming out. You might want to make sure you read it because you are in the book. So a lot of my team are in that book. They recognize their kind of fake names, and they all played key roles in various incidents throughout the book. So I think the reader has to get into it and find those out. And I've had several people that have had the opportunity to look at the book go, did that really happen? Or was it,
that's great, we want that.
Or was that, and it was Bruce the other day that asked me clearly, did that really happen? And I said, well, with a little variation.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's one of those things that we want people to read and find out and think about. Yeah. I'll quietly tell you next time we're together what the individual ones are, where they were. But I can't really give away Marriott's secrets. So,
but you've made me a safer traveler by touring through hotels and talking with you and doing research. Is it safe, or how much more aware should anyone be now traveling internationally?
Well, I think anybody has to be very conscious traveling anywhere, even the United States these days, and needs to be conscious of certain things. And when I believe we've Twittered some examples of things you need to look out for, and it's a list of about 29 different items. I think we bore people by going through the list right now, but in fact, you really need to know where you are in the hotel and what's around you. And even the hotels used to recommend that. You need to know where the exits are. You need to know what the level you are in the hotel. You know, hook and ladders don't go up to 52 stories if you're sleeping on the 52nd story and you've got a fire. I've been through several fires in hotels, and it's just something you need to be conscious of. That's regular traveling. That could be going up to Sacramento, not just dealing with, you know, trying to get through an international flight. But when you're traveling internationally, you do need to be more conscious of what's going on around you, clearly aware of the State Department alerts going into a country, and they're available to everybody. And we maintain in these various programs that we developed, and we went into some detail on how we developed our security standards in the book. You've got to understand what's going on in the country at the time. And I'm not talking about watching CNN. I'm talking about getting some real news beyond the local politics in the U.S. There are 35 incidents going on at any given time, and I've had that given to me by a professional in the world today, and our news picks up on very little of it. So if you're going somewhere, you need to know what's going on in that area.
And a little teaser in Red Hotel 2, or the sequel to Red Hotel, still working on the title. The last conversation Ed and I had, I began digging down into that and looking at where the White House might have had to deal with 2 or 3 crises in the past. Now they have to deal with a dozen or more at any given time. Or hope that the White House is dealing with them.
You mentioned that Red Hotel, the red means the level of security. Is there a place to see that before you travel somewhere?
Color red is a designation level. And your question was, how would you anticipate that?
Yeah.
Consumer would not necessarily know that, but when they approach the hotel, they would know the security that is provided there.
Okay.
Companies, on the other hand, have people that actually go to these, I used to call emerging, they're no longer emerging, but higher risk locations, because in the old days of the 90s and early 2000s, Europe was not a high risk stay. Things have changed dramatically. So the companies that travel to those locations and send their employees to those locations actually go out and inspect the hotels. And when they see the provisions made by the company to protect the hotel, then they're confident that their people can stay in that hotel with a higher degree of safety. So they have the right to say, you're not staying in product A, you're staying in product B, because they've got all the procedures, and they understand the levels, different levels of the security.
And the more defensive measures that are visible,
right,
the less likely often that property could be a target.
Oh, right. And I've given you a couple of those stories where we've been told by the police when there was a bombing in the city that they actually looked at one of our hotels first, saw the security measures, and went over to a competitor. So that's several occasions. So you want to be in a hotel that has safety, number one, on their mind.
I was going to ask, what do you want your readers to get from this novel? But the idea you guys have given me is that we should all pay more attention to our surroundings.
Well, we want you to have a good time reading it, number one.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Number two is to enjoy the political intrigue of the story, because it really has a very interesting intrigue that applies to today and could apply to any number of countries, frankly, smaller countries in conflict with countries on their border.
Absolutely.
It has many applications, but at the same time, it should give you confidence that when you travel, that you choose companies that do focus on security.
I've learned that. I've learned a lot. And I even told my wife, as we've traveled through Europe, I haven't gone to Asia, but I've traveled through Europe many times. I have sat at restaurants facing the most beautiful brick walls 3 feet in front of me, while my wife gets to look out and see fabulous people in great countries and people having a tremendously great time. I have said those days are over. You get to look at the wall now. I'm what to look for. I'm much more aware because of meeting, because of working with Ed. It doesn't be afraid of everywhere I go. It makes me more aware. So I'm hoping, as Ed does, that Red Hotel is a good espionage thriller. And yet there's some sexpionage as well. It should be a great page turner for people, but there's also deep inside information on a business that you haven't seen anywhere else.
But a business buddy participates in because they use hotels.
Yeah. So I was going to ask if there's a sequel in the works, but instead, what are some of the title ideas that you have for it? I know you haven't decided yet, but
should we give that out at this point?
You know what?
It's okay.
I don't. Yeah, haven't quite decided yet, and we haven't gone through copyright on it yet. But I will tell you that we have looked at a couple of interesting words, and we found synonyms for those words.
Right.
Can I tell this part of the story? And one of the synonyms for one of the words that would follow red is the word trickery and deceit. There's a synonym called, actual word, trumpery.
Oh.
The red.
If you think of trompe-l'oeil in terms of fake painting on a wall to suggest it's something real, it's based on a French word. And when we discovered that, no politics involved in here, but it did make us laugh a great deal. So the Red Hotel sequel hopefully will follow in 2020.
Yeah.
But
we're plowing ahead.
Nice.
And we'd love to see a movie.
Yeah.
we'd love you to see a movie as well, but we're working on that.
Cool.
Your question was directed to both of us, so quickly, I think that people sometimes forget the people in the story. The culture that impacts these stories are realities. I'm a big believer that if you don't understand the history of a country that you do business in, you cannot do business. If you do not understand the culture and the history of a country, you can't understand the people. I teach a class in which I ask the students in the class at University of California, Irvine, it's a master's level, to describe dealing with an American, because half the class is international students. And the Americans are utterly amazed when they hear the students describe the American culture. Well, in a global world, there's so many cultures, the interplay, the anticipation that you can come together and work together at the same time coexist. I'm amazed that we're all still on the same globe sitting together. And you think of what goes on around us. I got to go through a war, and I did my year in Vietnam, but I am against spending time fighting each other if we could just get together, work together, and be together. But there's so many factors that get in the way. And the fact is, we're human. And that writes the story that Gary's talking about, because the human personality is what really changes the world around us.
And you've told me that one of the lessons you learned was in a country, having somebody at the top there who was part of that country's culture is critical.
Oh, it's tremendously critical. At the same time, I think we miss some of the codes that we've seen, especially with the fall of the I hate to bring up the wall in Germany and Europe. When that wall came down, everybody was excited. But in reality, if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, Russia needed a stronger person to keep them together.
Right.
Many of the communist countries went back to people who were in the communist government because they needed that strength to hold their country together, because they were not ready for democracy. And we as Americans were running around going, oh, you're going to love democracy. It's easy. It's fun. George Bush had his greatest upcoming when he said, we've got to get the Gaza folks in Gaza to vote democratically. And they voted for Hamas.
Here's the vote. Look what they want.
We didn't want that. Well, the fact of the matter is that the culture is stronger than some of the influences we think we can give. And the Americans tend to want to drag their culture around instead of appreciating and taking time with the culture that's there. Hopefully we picked up on some of that.
We'll see. So thank you both for being here. I had a great time talking to you too. Red Hotel releases on March 19th, 2019, and the sequel will be here eventually.